Welcome back to Greek Mythology and the Homeric Chronicles. The next few episodes are dedicated to the Wonder Women of Greek mythology, and I am so ready to talk about the queens of Troy and Greece, Hecuba and Leda. These two women hold a special place in my heart. They are the mortal matriarchs of the Trojan War epic, and they deserve their fair share of the limelight, along with Helen, Clytemnestra, Andromache, and even Briseis. I wanted to talk about them side by side because they share similar qualities as matriarchs of their prestigious families. We can glean quite a bit about our heroes and a mother's love through their respective narratives. Hecuba and Leda are complex women who've suffered at the hands of the gods and their husbands. They fiercely love their children almost to a fault. They're complex and wise, powerful and tender, and uncompromising in their quest to establish control of their worlds. I'd like to take a wee side road about portraying the feminine role in Greek mythology. I've recently read a paper by Emily Hauser, PhD, and author of the Golden Apple Trilogy, about how ancient women's voices are echoed in modern fiction, and how it's in the minimal space that they're afforded in the text that gives us the latitude to explore who they were, contemplating their motivations, goals, and achievements in their own right. Dr. Hauser's paper is available at her academia.edu account if you have one. It's entitled There is Another Story, Writing After the Odyssey in Margaret Atwood's The Penelopead. Anyway, her paper got me thinking about how privileged I feel to be writing about all these lovely female characters, which for the most part hold pivotal positions in the most powerful stories, yet they're relegated to being foils or temptations for male characters, or the objects of illicit desires and subjects of kidnappings and rapes. So with this podcast, let their voices rise in modern song. Let's start with Queen Hecuba. Queen Hecuba is barely mentioned in Homer, yet she undoubtedly played a key parental role in raising Hector, the greatest defender of Troy. In the tension between Hector and Achilles, we see a mother's deep devotion and agony as she's helpless to keep her grown son safe from the notorious killer, Achilles. For a mother, there's no such thing as forgetting that your child was once young, that you carried them, you suckled them, and in return, they drank in your presence. Even as a grown man stands before you, rugged and bearded, shoulders wide enough to crush a bull, you can still see the little boy beneath the layers of years. And surely Hecuba had that kind of bond with her son Hector. How might this relationship have evolved? How might she have influenced her son's maturity and princehood, his priorities, loyalties, his sense of responsibilities? And most importantly, by looking at Hector's story, what can we hear Hecuba saying? We have to go back to the beginning. Hecuba was Priam's second wife, who became the primary wife and mother of almost 24 royal children. Hector was likely the first child they had together, as well as the first son, with Paris being the second son. Because Hector was the firstborn, he probably remembered the baby Paris, who disappeared. Perhaps he knew exactly what happened. Maybe not. It doesn't really matter. Only that he was there to witness the effects on his mother. He certainly would have remembered his mother's grief and sadness, because, prophecy or not, a mother doesn't forget a child she loses for whatever reason. Because Hecuba's voice is silenced in the myth, we've the freedom to explore what she felt by looking at her son's marriage and her desperate efforts in the Iliad to persuade Hector not to fight Achilles. I think Homer, whoever he or she was, understood the implied complexity of Hecuba and Hector's relationship on some level. Their marriages are mirrors of each other, and because of that we can see and hear Hecuba more clearly. There's the implication that Hector knew the pain his mother carried after the baby was stripped from her arms and afterward when King Priam took concubines, because Homer gave Hector's wife Andromache a barren womb until the 11th hour. There is a stark contrast to his mother's fertileness and her having to accept the existence of multiple wives and concubines. No doubt Andromache's barrenness troubled Hector for a couple of reasons. First, that he couldn't father a son or daughter, and secondly, his only viable option was to take another wife or collect concubines. He, of all the princes, should have had a brood of children to succeed him. If we take Priam's example into account, anyway. So, why doesn't he take a second wife or a concubine? That's exactly the dynamic I delve into in the Homeric Chronicles, and that gives us a clear vision of who Hecuba was. Let me read from the first book. 5 years, Hecuba thought. 5 years, and the ache for the son she'd never known still throbbed painfully in her chest. She'd grown accustomed to the hurt. Watching her children romping in the courtyard, the queen sighed. Little Deiphobus entertained his younger twin siblings with his wooden sword and shield. The youngest, Polydorus, nursed at her breast. She refused the wet nurse for all her children after the loss of her second son. Rarely did she allow her children from her sight. The ache for her second son pulled at her again, never giving her peace. In truth, some day she conjured the pain to remind her of his little face, and some day she cursed the sadness and prayed to Apollo and Artemis to wipe her memories of him. When Hector appeared at the courtyard gate, she smiled widely despite her melancholy. He waved, making straight for her. Only he had the power to dull the hurt that had become so much a part of her as a hand or a foot. The other children, although a source of joy, reminded her of the one she'd lost. Hector's presence was the only one not marred by grief. He was her golden prince. Hector approached and kissed his mother's cheek. "Mother," he said, pinching Polydorus's bare foot. The baby kicked at his elder brother's attempted affection. "Such a strong leg for someone so little," he laughed. "You're sad again, Mother. I can see it in your eyes." Patting his arm with her free hand, she said, "Nothing can be hidden from my Hector. Someday you'll be a wise king." Her eyes found her son's. "I'll always be sad. I fear that if I'm not, I'll forget him forever, and that would be worse. His memory is all your father left me of him." She switched the baby to her other breast, adjusting his heavy weight in the crook of her arm. A commotion across the courtyard drew Hecuba's attention. "Deiphobus! Be mindful of Helenus! Cassandra, move away from the fountain! Where is Tessa when I need her? Tessa!" From the balcony above them, Tessa called down to her queen. "Yes, my lady?" "Come, take the twins and the baby. They must rest." Deiphobus laughed at his younger siblings. Hecuba added, "And take Deiphobus as well." The boy threw his wooden armaments down, kicking the ground and mumbling to himself. "Truth be told, I am the one in need of rest." She rubbed the side of her swollen belly. "It seems I am forever with child." "How is your training?" Hector placed his hand on the pommel of his short sword. "I'm much better with the sword than a spear." Tessa came to take the children. The queen handed her servant a very sleepy baby. "Oh, my lady, he is a fat one." The nurse cradled him carefully in her arms and steered the gaggle inside, leaving Hector and his mother alone. "Where's my father?" Hector asked. Hecuba stiffened, where he always is this time of day. Hector wrapped his hand around his mother's, nearly dwarfing hers. "I'll have only one wife, Mother." "We'll find you a fine wife, Hector, a beauty in heart as well as face. If she's as beautiful as you, I'll be satisfied. But that is a long way off," he grinned, warming his mother's heart. Taking her hand, he pulled her up. "Come, I want to show you my horse." In Troy Fall of a City, they attempt to tackle the effect on Hecuba of abandoning Paris to death. Their Hecuba is at a strange peace with the decision, even though she and Priam have kept the truth from everyone. She doesn't blame Priam or even the gods, really. In fact, Priam is more distraught than she is, and it's Hecuba who comforts Priam, all the while defending the decision. They're portrayed as an intimate and passionate couple, and I find this voice and portrayal of Hecuba unsatisfying. Perhaps it's because it's a masculine writer's attempt to create a strong Trojan queen that any true regret and lingering grief was maybe just glossed over. Perhaps a mother tormented all her life by grief somehow made Hecuba seem to the modern masculine writer as weak. I don't know. Women who've lost a child know that it's in the quiet grief of loss their deceased children remain alive. The life their child should have had emerges at each anniversary of their death with thoughts like, today I would have had a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, or a 15-year-old. And that's really a part of a mother's strength, carrying and living with that particular pain. And this pain is echoed at any time with the loss of a child at any age. Hecuba's most passionate and telling scene as a woman and a mother to Hector was also incomplete. And at the end of the day, Troy, Fall of a City, really stripped Hecuba down to a two-dimensional character at best. The fact that Hector never took a second wife is significant. In the Homeric Chronicles, I explore his character as being a lifelong observer of his mother's grief and heartbreak. He doesn't set Andromache aside because he knows firsthand the grief his mother experienced at losing a child and his mother's pain at having to watch other women bear her husband's children. If it was no big deal to have concubines and father children by somebody other than your wife, then he likely would have, because as the Prince of Troy, he needed heirs. But we don't even have whispers that this was even a question. Perhaps he observed his mother's growing distance from his father, and he didn't want to risk losing Andromache's love. Certainly Hector loved Andromache, but it was Hecuba, not Priam, who taught him how to love and honor a woman. As for Hecuba and Priam's relationship, Hecuba would surely have been a devoted and dutiful queen to Troy, but I've left room for the woman behind the crown. I think it likely she'd blame Priam for the loss of Paris and her years of Greece, at least for a while. Watching your husband father a brood of heirs by other women could certainly create an emotionally distant wife. That's the path I took anyway in the Homeric Chronicles. The most telling scene we have of Hecuba in the end is when Achilles comes for Hector. Hecuba has already lost several children to the murderous Greek and begs Hector to stay behind the wall and live. Her agony at anticipating his death would be clearly evident. Reading from Fagel's Iliad 22, 94 through 107. And his mother wailed now, standing beside Priam, weeping freely, loosening her robes with one hand and holding out her bare breast with the other, her words pouring forth in a flight of grief and tears. Hector, my child, look! Have some respect for this. Pity your mother too, if ever I gave you the breast to soothe your troubles. Remember it now, dear boy. Beat back that savage man from safe inside the walls. Don't go forth, a champion pitted against him, merciless, brutal man. If he kills you now, how can I ever mourn you on your deathbed? Dear branch in bloom, dear child I brought in birth. Neither I nor your wife, that warm, generous woman, now far beyond our reach, now by the Argive ships the rushing dogs will tear you, bolt your flesh. So they wept, the two of them crying out to their dear son, both pleading time and again, but they could not shake the fixed resolve of Hector. What happened to her son was worse than she could ever have imagined. One can only wonder how she survived the horrific scene. I think this image of a mother showing her breast is significant to Hecuba's character. It's a simple act carrying the most powerful message a woman can give without words. And to make my earlier point more clearly, Hecuba is addressing the mightiest warrior as child and boy, not because she's diminishing his prowess, but because as a mother, her first instinct is to reach the little boy inside the man who she lavished her love and attention on, who she was able to comfort. By examining Hector's life, we see a Hecuba who is stoic, resilient, and strong, a woman devoted to her children, especially her favorite son, Hector, almost to a fault. And this bond between mother and son is most evident when in her desperation to save him from merciless Achilles, she set aside her modesty in front of the court by literally pulling her breast from her gown, showing it to Hector, and calling him out to ease her agony by reminding him of what she's given him all his life: love, loyalty, and support. Let's turn to the Spartan queen, Leda. Queen Leda is an intriguing character whose voice, like Hecuba's, is mostly silent in the text. She's the queen of Sparta, wife to Tyndareus, and mother to 4 famous children: Castor, Pollux, Clytemnestra, and Helen. Yet, most of what we know of her is through her rape by Zeus and her quiet death. I'd like to examine how she's resilient and a survivor. So I guess the best place to start is with what Zeus did to her. So many works of art and literature have depicted the union of Leda and Zeus as sensuous or consensual, but I think it was neither sensual nor consensual. By the balls of Zeus, it was a giant swan, a flapping fowl. How can being set upon by an animal or rain or a horse not be scary? And the bestiality of it, Zeus or not, is horrifying. By making it sexy, we diminish the trauma Leda suffered. Furthermore, she's assaulted not once, but twice, by my count. In the first 3 episodes, I debunked the 4 eggs in a batch theory in favor of a more humanistic approach. There's no way that the brothers Castor and Pollux could be the same age as Helen because they're grown men when she's kidnapped for the first time. And if you missed the first 3 episodes where I talk about my ever-expanding timeline, you can go back and give them a listen when you have a chance. And because I don't think the brothers were the same age, that means that Leda is assaulted twice by Zeus. Regardless, once would be enough to traumatize Leda, and this would definitely affect her relationships. In the first book of the Homeric Chronicles, I write the rape of Leda for what it was: awful and horrifying. Zeus used Leda as a tool to dominate and control his world. Clearly, Zeus is a master at manipulating. He doesn't have to lay with mortal women, yet he seems unable to control himself. He's a serial cheater who has no respect for Hera, his wife. In a way, Zeus is a mirror of Odysseus's infidelities, whose cheating we minimize because he's been enchanted by goddesses. Zeus, on the other hand, is the enchanter, the aggressor, the predator, and that's just not sexy. It's unbalanced. The power difference between Zeus and his mortal conquests is entirely tipped in his favor, and the women have no choice but to give him what he wants. And that makes his union with Leda rape. There's no equality between Zeus and any mortal woman, only what Zeus wishes to take. It's about a god using sex as a weapon for his own ego. And yes, I think Zeus has an ego the size of Asia. How would this experience affect Leda as a woman, a queen, and a wife and mother? That's what I thought about as I developed her character. I wanted to reconcile her humanity with the myth. Being raped by Zeus was no doubt traumatic. Leda's response was to initially feel degraded and then defiant. And it's that reaction I used to build her character into a resilient character in the mythological world of the Homeric Chronicles. Leda understands her position in a patriarchal society. She knows she can't fight Zeus's advances or Tyndareus's inevitable disdain for her violation. And regarding Tyndareus's reaction, I took the Philip of Macedonia route, where Philip was disgusted by Olympus after seeing her with Zeus in the form of a snake. Leda is forced to live with her husband's indifference. This passage is from the second book of the Homeric Chronicles, Rise of Princes. This passage is from the second book of the Homeric Chronicles, Rise of Princes. Tyndareus had raged and roared when word came to him that Menelaus had sailed for Troy. That weak bastard, he couldn't even keep Helen safe from herself. He'd let the whole of Sparta fall into ruin or worse to chase that pretty face across the sea. No woman is worth so much. Leda had cringed at the words and the sentiment behind them. She partially blamed herself for keeping Helen at arm's length, for not being a more doting mother. for fearing Zeus's continued interference more than loving her daughter. In truth, she kept all her children a safe distance from her heart. She loved them, but was fearful of showing her devotion, fearing that the gods would strike that joy from her life as well. To them she appeared cold and iron-hearted, but beneath she burned with passion and love for all her children, those by Zeus and Tyndareus. "I will undo what I have done with that imbecile," he said, as he'd prepared the letter to Menelaus. "I'll tell him what has to be done in Sparta. Let him try and stop me." "What of Agamemnon?" Leda had asked. "What of that fat clod? He's no better, taking the whole of his army and navy to bring back a whore." "She's our daughter," Leda had defended Helen. Tyndareus stopped writing and stared at his wife, anger and loathing clearly evident. No daughter of mine would abandon Sparta. Leda had remained silent at that, for she had no defense. Zeus had fathered Helen. Tyndareus loved Helen as a pawn in his Game of Thrones, but he did not love her as flesh of his flesh as she did. She sighed. Time changed nothing. If her husband was successful, he would claim Sparta and unite it with Mycenae under his name, usurping the thrones of Agamemnon and Menelaus in a single maneuver. She smiled to herself, knowing Clytemnestra would fight her father to maintain her grip on Mycenae. So, Leda survived being raped, watched her eldest daughter endure unspeakable atrocities, suffered the loss of 2 grandchildren, was forced to remain silent about her personal agonies for Helen. But when her sons Castor and Pollux die unexpectedly, that's when her spirit is finally broken, and she receives empathy from the most unlikely of sources, Zeus. Despite all the odds, Leda's resilient and defiant to the end, and worthy of being counted as a Wonder Woman of Greek mythology. Up next is Andromache, Princess of Troy. Well, that's it for this episode. Hope you enjoyed listening to me talk about Hecuba and Leda. Subscribe and follow me on iTunes and Spreaker, and throw some stars at me if you like what I've been sharing. Downloads have been steady, and I thank all of you for that. There's so much more to come. Up next, I'm also thinking about doing a series on Troy, Fall of the City, because I have so many thoughts about the Netflix epic. Maybe I can collaborate with somebody on that. We'll see. Soon, I also promise I'll get some videos based on these podcasts up on YouTube. If you want to read the full stories, the first 2 books are available at Amazon. My first book is available free at my webpage. Well, what do you think about these matriarchs of Greek mythology? Do you agree with my conclusions about Hecuba and Leda? I'd really love to hear from you and answer any questions you have. You can find me at www.janellerianen.com. And my favorite place to be is on Twitter at The Raven Angel, Facebook page, Janelle Rhiannon author page, and my IG account is Janelle_Rhiannon, and YouTube is Janelle Rhiannon. Well, that's it, Myrmidons. Drink your wine and be merry.